Welcome everyone. Today we have our new episode and we will discuss on brain inspired computing, and we are really happy because our honorable speakers, how they're contributing for Talent Economy Forum. Already it's become so popular in Asia Pacific. Different government body, prime minister office, even the different corporation, they're observing our show, and they also organizing this kind of dialogue with the help of World Talent Economy Forum. And beside that, we are developing the blueprints, and definitely our speakers, our board of advisors, all of them are very valuable because Asia Pacific economy is the future for the global economy, and we need more knowledgeable people like our speakers. And we are getting a very good feedback from the government body, from the academy, and from the corporations. And this way, hopefully we can make a better world, and we will rebuild this new world. So I want to start from Professor Rob. Professor Rob, we will discuss on brain-inspired computing. How you want to analyze today's topic?
Well, I think I just shouldn't go back to bed. But anyway, brain-inspired computing. So that we begin with neural networks. So the effort is to emulate the problem-solving capability of the brain. The computerized neuron is about 1,000th of the performance of a human neuron. So you need 1,000 computer neurons to do a human neuron. And latest counts, though the counts for human neurons are all over the map, about 69 billion neurons in the human brain. So it's a significant it's a significant challenge to just create the structure for this, let alone the software. The most interesting effort, one that Jeff Bezos and Mark Zuckerberg are backing, is brain emulation, WBE. That's the idea of being able to upload a human brain into a construct that emulates the brain and would give that construct virtual immortality. There are some doubts whether, because the brain is constantly losing large numbers of neurons and rebuilding itself. The person you were, the saying is the person you were when you were a child is not the person you were when you were an adult, because you've changed your brain structure a lot between those two periods of time. That's something that has been built into these models. So if we were going to do a human brain emulation, one, it would be a rough copy of you, and two, it probably wouldn't evolve much, because you would not, with the current technology, have that same shedding of neurons over time, which would alter personality and alter the way that the computer interacted with the world around it. Much of the science fiction area surrounds this concept of emulating human brains, either it's just too early for that word. Either it's considering a machine to be an animal, or providing a personality to something like a car or whatever. We are, as humans, much more likely to do that early on, long before computers capable of doing it. And in fact, right now, the state of the art is really single-purpose artificial intelligence. As we're trying to move towards general-purpose artificial intelligence, which would approach that human brain ability. And we also have two categories of AI. One, machine learning, the other is deep learning. Machine learning requires data scientists to set up the training sets and to train the computer. Then that learning is passed on to inference computers, which then emulate what the taught computer does, and showcases the advantages to AI in that you can train them at computer speeds, either initially through simulation or eventually through download, and allowing you to create, thousands, millions, billions of like-minded computers instantaneously once you solve that initial training set. So where we are is really pretty early into this stage. Most of us have about 2040 as the crossover point for general computing, which is very close to when the projection for singularity is, which is somewhere between the 2040 and 2050 time period. But recognize that anything out 10 years or more is very hypothetical. We're really good at predicting what can happen within 3 to 5 years. We kind of suck at predicting what can happen in 10 to 20 years. And so this is pretty iffy. One big breakthrough could move this in, but it's more likely to move out. Like a lot of things, it's going to seem like it's going really slow until it happens, and it's going to feel like somebody flipped a switch. So right now, if you're looking at this particular space, certainly this idea of WBE, this whole brain emulation, is a very interesting place to study, but you would need both computer science skills and undoubtedly psychological skills of some medical experience and understanding of the brain to make this work, because that's what gives you your goal. You have to know enough about the subject matter to be able to program against it. So it's not something that can be done by someone that is either, fish or fowl. It's going to require a certain number of people that understand both concepts and are able to create that initial emulation of the brain to go forward.
Thank you, Professor Rob. Professor David Smith, how you want to analyze to this topic, and if you give some example, because World Talent Economy Forum, even today we get offer from EMGS. It's a like all of the educational body, like all higher education university. We have more than 100 university in Malaysia. They are under EMGS, and their CEO also join with World Talent Economy Forum, and they want our content for the youth communities in Malaysia. Actually, thousand and thousand youth communities comes to Malaysia, and they are learning from World Talent Economy Forum. So we need some specific example. I know you are also professor from university, and you are also man from industry.
Sharif, thank you for this. I love Rob's introduction to it, except I think it started just a little bit earlier than as we look at this in this standpoint. Back in 1995, I did a roadmap for this, for biological computing, for one of the government agencies in the United States, and actually look at ways to implement the various parts of it. To me, as you look at brain-inspired computing, you also have to look at biologically inspired computing at the same time, because the nuances are so similar between them. And as you look at some of particularly academic research, there's a big overlap between brain-inspired, biologically inspired, artificial intelligence, how neural networks are engaged and used, and really how knowledge discovery works. So those pieces really come together to support what you're trying to do. One of the things is I look at this, it's broken down into so many different areas. And earlier we were talking about neuromorphic chips. And neuromorphic chips are one of the ways where you can go into brain-inspired computing pretty quickly. But even if looking at a chipset in neuromorphic computing, there's three different types. There's an analog chipset, which is really good for brain-inspired because of the way it processes the data. And we think very analog as it is. There's the digital chipsets, and then there's the biological chipsets that are using strands of RNA as part of their computer engine to begin to do the processing. So even in something as simple as looking at brain-inspired computer chips, there's a lot of diversity of the processes and what you're beginning to do with it. To me, some of the challenges in this, though, are where we need to push the research, and particularly from people who are coming at it with a clean slate and looking at it in such of those ways. So, one of them is that as I look at how we do brain-inspired computing, there's constrained computer architecture and capabilities. If you think about how we as a human process the data, we have so many different channels that we can process so many things simultaneously and pull results out in different ways and threads that is really hard to do with classic computer architecture. So the research part of your question, Sri, that is one of the challenges where we really have to put more research done. The other is really we need to do brain-inspired computational models and algorithms that are based on multi-scale brain neural systems, and begin to look at the way to do these multi-scale. Oftentimes, when a developer writes a program today, they tend to follow single paths. and do execution trees, where this goes back to what the early days of classic parallel computing was trying to do, is to say how many different threads I can break things up into and combine data from them at the appropriate parts. Brain-inspired computing is really good about doing that because we can do so many different thought processes. We can look, we can pull sensor data in, we can do all those from our senses and do it in real time with multiple programs running in our head. That's what brain inspired computing has to do too, is that type of processing to be effective. And that is still one of the challenges we see, particularly in academia, is we're looking at how to develop that type of model and how to get algorithms to work in pieces and parts and contribute and refine and contribute and refine, which is one of the nuances of what a brain inspired computation is versus a traditional Van Neumann approach to using algorithms and day-to-day processing. The other thing I will say, though, and this is one of the places I disagree a little bit with Rob, is that as I begin to look at where this is going, that initial classified roadmap I did way back in the 90s, and it was a 40-year roadmap. There's places today that are still hitting there. And so you can begin to put the forecast together, you can begin to put the roadmaps together, but there are changes, like Rob said, that can dramatically accelerate it. And if you go back to one of the things Gartner used to do, they had their whole valley of disenchant. Well, you're going to have that with biologically inspired computing and brain inspired computing because the promise is so big, but the challenges are big. Today we hear a lot about quantum computing, and quantum computing has come so far. And quantum computing is great when I'm crunching numbers. Biologically inspired computing and brain inspired computing is great when I'm looking at complex problems that have multiple variations to it, that have multiple solutions, multiple scenarios, because of the parallel processing capability there versus quantum computing. So you've got to balance all of those to look at this problem because it is a complex problem that it has probably still a good 15 years away from commercial solutions that can scale. You're seeing it working in very specialized places today, in very specialized type of processing, but from widespread commercial use, I would say it's about 15 years away. So Sharif, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Professor David Smith. And when we just organizing this show and discussion that time, I get confirmation from Australian Senator Anning. He is joining in World Talent Economy Forum. So all of the politicians and the corporations and the academia, we are involving with them, and they are really happy with the contribution of World Talent Economy Forum. Day by day it becomes so popular, and this is because of you people, because how we getting support from our speakers. This is very important. Now time for Mr. Tom Rose. Actually, we are very happy. Even yesterday show, we are discussing about your initiative. A few of the largest university from Asia Pacific, they are very happy with your initiative, your political initiative. In South Asia, Mahatma Gandhi is a very popular, and he brings the new concept of the politics, and he developed a new India, new South Asia. And how should I say that actually many university, think tank and organization, they are thinking that you are bringing the new concept for this world, and hope through this process. Even yesterday we discussed how actually technology give us some transparencies in developing nations. You also bringing your running mate in the politics. It's become so popular, and I don't know, the university people, they want to say and they want to recognize you as a Bapu. Bapu means like Mahatma Gandhi, everybody know him, Bapu 2024. So what's new? What do you think? So sometimes this kind of concept is very popular. Yesterday we declared about your campaign. So Bapu 2024, what you want to add for today's discussion?
Well, yeah, this campaign, it's a 3-year conversation. It's set for 2024, obviously, and it's very early. It's very early in the process, and actually seems early to talk about these things. I'm putting up a non-human running mate. And before the primary, I will announce what that is, whether it's an existing AI that we find and work with, whether it's a Golem we create in the next 3 years specifically for this purpose, or it could very well be, and we'll talk about this next week, is a centaur, human centaur AI that as a combination of both, if it's not me. So we got 3 years to work through this, and there's no real intention or expectation that I will have a robot as a running as a VP, right? But what this is doing is forcing the questions that are causing some really intriguing conversations that we need to have as soon as possible. It could be 3 years, it could be 10 years, it could be 50 years, but at some point, AGI will reach a certain level of personhood once we all agree on what that is, and I believe should seek decision-making political office. The sooner my opinion is the sooner we get our emotional biased quantum brains out of the process, the better. Some of the process, the better. We should always be shepherds. We should always be the final decision maker once an AI or a non-human intelligence gives us all the facts that we need. But anyway, what this is doing is forcing these conversations. I think we need to have them as soon as we can before we need to have them. And so by presenting the idea of a non-human intelligent running mate candidate, it's going to expose obstacles in the system for future non-human intelligent office seekers. It's going to help us figure out how to integrate non-human intelligence better into the political process, if not the governing process. And it's happening anyway. So our choice we still have is whether AI will be an infiltration into all of our systems or an integration. And so we need to ask these questions. We need to have these conversations that seem strange and weird and sci-fi, but they're not. And that's what attracted me to the Transhumanist Party in the first place, is it's the only party I saw talking about these issues that my sons and their children one day will have to deal with. And so, yeah, so this is just a way to juice the conversation, and we've got 3 years to have it, and a lot can change in 3 years. And I am remaining agile and fluid. I'm not going to say it's definitely going to be a robot running mate, but I'm gonna open up to what's the most logical way to push this idea forward without it becoming a caricature of itself. And so that's what we're doing. And I like coming on these shows because they're just such a master class when you have Rob and David and teaching me all this stuff about AI, and it brings up so many important questions. Because I feel like I'm a liaison between people like you guys, these super intelligent AI scientists and academics, and the general public. Just a quick story. The last week we had a friend over of my son, millennial, who came over just to see us. We haven't seen her in years. And she asked me, what is AI? And, and when you're in this bubble, it's like, that question is like, what is air? It's like, we have to realize that so many people, maybe even the majority of people, if they don't even know about the proliferation of AI, or if they do know about it, they're afraid of it because of the Hollywood problem. So a lot of my effort is to first define the terms, explain to a millennial who doesn't know what artificial intelligence is. It's also to seek better definitions before these words get too deep into the zeitgeist and we can't pull them back. AI is pretty well done. It's pretty embedded in the culture right now as a catch-all phrase for all of this stuff. And I know it makes scientists and academics twitchy when we use the wrong terms. And so one thing I'm trying to do is get us all to agree on certain terms, to put them out there and continue to put them out there, and to seize back the narrative of transhumanism in the next 3 years, so that there's a cohesive message that we can put forward for whoever ends up being the nominee.
Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Dan.
Oh, well, the other transhumanist poetician in the House, having run twice for city council in what I like to call Thousand Earths, because I think Thousand Oaks has the potential to be the headquarters of a global brain kind of Thousand Earths society, which eventually, hopefully, will make us a multiplanetary species, because right now we are in what's called overshoot, planetary overshoot. We are using something like 2 planets worth of resources, and if everyone went to the level of the American standard of living, it would be 4 planets worth of resources. So that's obviously not sustainable. But you know what? When the chick is in the egg yolk, that it looks like it's in a condition of overshoot. It's like, oh my God, we've run out of resources. You know, what's going to happen? And then it starts pecking, trying to find more resources. And look what happens. It comes out into this whole new universe that was not anticipated. And I think that's the process that humanity is actually going through right now. We are evolution's way of making new eggs and new environments to wire up new brains for. And I think that's really what we're seeing right now with the internet and with brain-inspired computing, which is a new hashtag I'm trying to propagate on the internet. And this has been talked about by many great minds. You know, H.G. Wells wrote a book called Global Brain back in 1938. You know, Teilhard de Chardin talked about the noosphere, the global nervous system. You know, many of the great minds have seen this organic rewiring of Gaia's nervous system that's taking place. And I think it's taking place in a way that's going to birth us into a cosmic species. At least that's what I'm rooting for. And you know, I think we need to use all the art resources and all the you know, ancient and modern resources. We need to back up the human intelligence archive in a decentralized way. I would like to see backups held on the opposite side of the world, or the antipode, and that's actually one aspect of the Permatrail project, is that people find and connect with the neighborhood that's on the opposite side of the world. Because if you think about it, if we have a cosmic event like an asteroid impact, where's the maximum safe place to back up your global brain? It's going to be the opposite side of the world. So and then we need, you know, trees, we're finding out have their own microbial brain in the soil. They use fungi and microbes to actually move deep soil resources around. When one tree needs resources, the microbes kind of act as a global brain. So I think I'm proud to be a microbe in the deep soil global brain that's developing, and I'm so honored to come here and learn with all these great panelists. So thanks. Back to you, Sharif.
Dr. William.
Yes.
Yes.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. Listen, once again, I appreciate this, and I love learning from my colleagues. I guess on this issue, I've been looking at it in terms of policy concerns, because much like any other transformative type of technology, there are policy concerns that, if are addressed or at least considered at the inception, should make decisions at least a bit more reasonable. And I guess in that regard, I have 2 different trains of thought. As with any technology, as a policy matter, there's just going to be the natural resources. I mean, the complex nature and structure of what both David and Rob have been talking about, which is the creation of neuromorphic computing. First of all, it's different than, as Dave explained, the Van Neumann computing architecture, simply because the neuromorphic one requires nanotechnology, and it requires different types of materials. And one of the benefits of the neuromorphic model essentially is the reduction in the requisite amount of energy. And that's one of the real savings, because quite frankly, as Rob, I assume, would explain in more eloquently and in more detail, the nature of the amount of energy that's required to produce, that we need in order to produce current AI, or in whatever its form, is far in excess of what the human brain requires to produce the same amount of computing skills. That is to say, we're far more efficient, but as biological beings with regard to understanding, processing, and delivering information. And so as we make this transformative leap, we're going to need the input materials, and that's going to be, multifaceted. Earlier it was mentioned that you're going to need essentially a cross-disciplinary workforce, those people that are fluent in computer science as well as biology, and that is converting analog processing, which we currently have, into some sort of crossover or hybrid that has a biological component to it, which obviously means biology, but that's going to require different materials. And so herein lies the rub. As a policy matter, governmental officials or even corporations, because policy is not exclusive to government, and I don't want to necessarily pigeonhole, just like scientists don't want to be pigeonholed and be called nerds and things of that nature, rather than the forward-thinking thought leaders that they are. Policy or governance is not necessarily limited to governments and what you're doing with the people. It comes with corporations. If you're a corporation pursuing these kinds of technologies, then you have a bunch of concerns. What are you going to make it out of? Where are you going to get it? And are you going to have enough of it in order to, beat your competitors? And is there going to be a sustainable stream of those inputs in the future? Are you going to have the workforce necessary in order to produce it? Are you going to be able to have the agreements? One of the things with regard to this technology is it knows no geographic boundaries. And so in that regard, right now, we could talk about the point of harmonization. Fine. Maybe it's 5 years, 10 years, 20 years down the road. But the farther down the road it is, the more time that governments and corporations have. Because one thing is true when we start to think about it extended into the future is simply this, and that it is a transformative technology. And it's a transformative computing system. And it has implications from economic, society, health, but more importantly, foreign relations, as well as weapons technology, as well as feeding people. Any number of things, it cuts across the board. And so it literally has the potential. And here are the as you begin to think about the risk, not only the input, but you begin to think about a sudden transformation of the balance of power. So, looking back, policy for both corporations, individuals, as well as governments. It could be true that this kind of technology, once achieved, vitiates what we now know as natural borders. And so when we then think about it in terms of putting it down today in real-time terms, we have China with their foreign policy on multiple fronts with the Silk Road Initiative. They are essentially on a 10, 20-year plan to harvest and or secure raw materials across the globe from various places to augment the raw materials that they do not have, particularly in the rare earth minerals. More importantly, and this is a fundamental issue, but it's the need for water, good, clean water, because water is necessary in the high-tech processing. So those kinds of policy considerations. So what we have what kind of technologies and inputs are you going to need? Well, you're going to need nanotechnology. You're going to have a manufacturing workforce, and then raw materials. So as a policy matter, you ought to begin to position yourself to identify where that is, make agreements with those nations to secure your supply, and or begin to look at your workforce and workforce displacement and or development so that you have that in place for the inputs while you are concurrently on a different train track pursuing the development and implementation of it. Separately, there is the question of what happens with risk. Because what happens if you have, as has been true in the past, and I am going to date myself, and for some of the younger audience, in the past there was the debate or the race between Betamax and VHS, and Betamax lost out. And then you had a concurrent fight between cassette tapes and CDs. CDs won. And then you had CDs versus iPods, and iPods won. in terms of the transference of information. And then you had iPods versus the cloud. So the question becomes, each one of those was a transference or a shift in the balance of power in terms of technology, but it was over a relatively extended period of time, given the speed with which we can change things now. Well, with this new form of technology, bio-based technology, once it happens, well, it's going to happen sooner, but once it happens, it's going to speed it up, and it has the potential to immediately change the balance of power between nations, between corporations, between just about anything. And whoever races to it and gets it first will have a complete, unapproachable, superior advantage. And how do you fight with that? And so do you want to build the kinds of relationships to make it more of a collaborative approach, or is it soon winner take all? So I will leave it at that for the time being, but it seems to me that you ought to bake in both. As you're planning and you have your goal, you need to understand and plan what you're going to have by way of, and by the same token, what the policy concerns and what the world is going to look like. If it's one, a winner take all. Two, where your government is going to stand. Three, what are the capabilities of nations. Four, the raw materials, and how it's all going to change. So with that, I return it to you, Dr. Sharif.
Thank you, Dr. William. We have our world-famous speaker, Professor David Kelly. So how are you today? And today we are discussing about brain-inspired computing. So my question is, what is brain-inspired computing? And if you give us some example from industry. And another question from our student community from Asia Pacific. You love to join in academy as a professor soon in Asia Pacific? They love to see you.
If there's a good opportunity, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, they love to see you in classroom. Yeah, everybody can join. Okay.
I'm doing well. I'm getting ready for my first business trip since COVID started. The whole COVID started when I was in Germany, and we've been in lockdown for all this time. So tomorrow I'm going to be flying, which is going to be great. So that's cool. Now, in terms of brain-inspired cognitive architectures, so that, or you're calling it brain-inspired computing architecture?
Yes.
So I'm actually the executive director of BICA Society, which is Brain-Inspired Cognitive Architecture Society. It's an academic association primarily focused on, we do a conference every year and usually publish in like Springer, Presidia, or something, or at least the conference proceedings are scheduled there.
It's biologically inspired.
Yeah, well, yeah, biologically inspired cognitive architecture. So, in terms of examples of that, I mean, there's quite a few researchers working on it. I know our ICON cognitive architecture is a biologically inspired cognitive architecture. Even more, just like narrow AI implementations, like any kind of deep neural network, that's biologically inspired cognitive architecture. You could even call something like swarm systems like unanimous AI a biologically inspired cognitive architecture to a large degree. But in my opinion, these kinds of architectures are probably the fastest way to AGI. I don't think necessarily it's the only way, but it's certainly the fastest way because we have working examples of them.
Thank you, Professor David. Like this is our next initiative, World Talent Economy Forum. Actually, Adam also working with me closely. Beside this open dialogues and under the School of Talent Economy, we are targeting 1 million students from developing nations. Already different school, college, and university, they are engaging with World Talent Economy Forum, and we want to develop knowledge-based communities. And hopefully by 3 years we will get 1 million students. And in our like this academy, STM-based academy, we want all of your contributions. Professor David, Professor Rob, Professor David Kelly, Mr. Tom Rose, Mr. Dan, Dr. Williams, everybody can contribute. because knowledge is important, and we will ensure the best quality like academicians and the professor from industries, they will join. So I request the audience, those who are observing our show, already many universities and the many government body, they are collaborating with World Talent Economy Forum, but we need more of your support. Hopefully by 3 years we can engage with 1 million student. Our age target is 18 to 30 years old, because we have to develop a creator economy. And I'm sure our board of advisor, our honorable board of advisor, our ambassadors, and our scientific committee member, they are highly capable, and they are best of the best in their area. And with their mentorship, I'm sure the developing nations can get more solutions. So already many university, they all I think last session, Mr. Adam with me, and he also find that Daffodil University, European University, independent university, they have hundred of thousand students. Their dean, their vice chancellor, everybody join in World Talent Economy Forum, because they think that we are ultimately the right platform, and we can contribute for the developing nations. So Mr. Adam, what's new you want to add? And thank you that you are doing hard work with our core team. So what's new you want to add for today?
Well, I like this subject very much. I don't really know too much about neural networks and stuff, but I do find interfaces and emerging technology with AI and brains. So I just wanted to go over a few ideas I may have covered before, like I said, interfacing especially. The past few years, we have witnessed some noteworthy ideas and developments. From a medical perspective, we could use this kind of technology in therapeutics for patients with locked-in syndrome, so doctors and nurses can get more of an accurate picture of how aware they really are, so as not to make any mistakes that could drastically reduce patients' chances of recovery. And looking a few decades ahead, we could use these interfaces in tandem with enhancement prosthesis, where it would be possible for a future surgeon to work with robotic interfaces that go beyond not only two hands, but also the usual tools like scalpels and sutures. Because I've grown a bit skeptical that we should leave tasks like this to AI completely. Intuitively, I feel the way forward will be from bridging the divide between the human mind and AI. And like I touched upon in yesterday's discussion, the bridge between the human mind and AI could also allow for the polymathic mind and the specialized mind to come together. Could Da Vinci, the polymath, have existed in our time? I would say no, probably not. We are in the age of what kind of ultra specialization, and vice versa. Could a scientist specializing in something ultra specialized like psychoneuroimmunopharmacology have existed in the Enlightenment or the Renaissance, where polymathic endeavors were more possible back then? Again, I would hazard to say probably not. And leaving AI behind a little bit, I think this technology promises to help solve some of the mysteries of empathy, sympathy, morality, ethics, philosophy. Going a bit further into the future again, another kind of prosthesis that bridges two human brains or more, for example, could really help to revolutionize the way we interact. Like a future summer of love, maybe. It could even evolve into a century of love or the age of love if we experienced empathogenic technology where one's consciousness connects with another in an artificial link-up, or if you'd like, telepathy. So this could shine a light on the so far immortal mysteries of consciousness, like the hard problems of consciousness. But how can we tell the difference between a genuine and pathogenic link from a mere hallucination of another mind being seemingly there and connected to from your own mind? Another transhumanist conception is the information download machine, like we saw in the Matrix, where someone can learn a new skill or sphere of activity or study in a matter of minutes or seconds. So if you can plug your mind into the internet and download 100 Wikipedia articles about geology or whatever, then how does that type of learning differ from an ancestor that had the discipline to not only learn about the very same subject, but to retain it, access it, and wield it? Would this kind of knowledge downloading be considered as learning at all? Or would it be a more hollow kind of pseudo learning? But my biggest concern is within the field of synthetic biology, where scientists and technicians start to feel more confident with growing mini brains in laboratories. We don't want to be responsible for the creation of a literal hell realm where these potentially conscious brains, neural networks are being subjected to great suffering, perhaps unintentionally. So that is where empathogenic link-ups and multi-conscious networks could be used to measure the subjective suffering experienced by other beings. And furthermore, these kinds of tools could help answer the mysteries of animal cognition as well, which could revolutionize how we approach the problems of suffering, like a la factory farms and slaughterhouses. So it looks like a consciousness revolution is underway because psychedelics are making a resurgence. Well, it's probably a second revolution, actually, after the first one a few decades ago. So we could say this emerging technology will be a kind of cyberdelic revolution with more possibilities with qualia and consciousness, the exploration of the mind. Thank you, Sharif.
Thank you. Professor Rob, I have a question for you, like why we need neuromorphic computing and how neuromorphic computing work, like just some simple word for our audience because they are very young, from your industrial knowledge perspective. Yes, Professor Rob.
Well, it's supposedly one of the paths to a general purpose AI.
Mm-hmm.
The idea of being able to create an AI that could be put into a situation much like a new employee would be put into a company, and that would immediately be able to pick up whatever the task was and be able to do it competently. That's kind of the promise. As Adam pointed out, other benefits would be the ability to emulate and test for mental conditions in people or animals. Once you create something that can think like a biological construct, then you can simulate those constructs and figure out how they would work and interrelate. So, for instance, if you wanted to begin translating much more accurately what dolphins were saying, for instance, a computer like this would be incredibly helpful because you could emulate the dolphin all the way across, and then in simulation create a set of scenarios operating at machine speed and be able to make much better guesses about what the sounds the dolphins were making actually meant across a large virtual population of those dolphins. So you could do some really interesting things with regard to understanding how creatures, including humans, think. And through simulation, you could test remedies. For instance, if you wanted to deal with a particular mental malady, you could try different theoretical approaches, once again at machine speeds, find the most effective, and then broadcast that out in a relatively short period of time, making all psychiatrists much more effective at treating their individual patients. And potentially, eventually, you could have a computerized psychiatrist that you'd walk in, it would analyze you very quickly and tell you just what you needed to hear to put your brain back on whatever was considered to be the right track. Now, we could argue for a long time about what that right track would be. And there's certainly some risk. Always with any AI, the risk goes into the training set, and the ability to build bias into that training set and create unintended outcomes continues to be a major problem. And that's why most of the large companies working on this are spending as much time on eliminating bias as they are trying to create the constructs. But that's what it is. You create something that can step in and do something that a human or a biological entity could do at a relatively high speed, something that we really can't do today. Now, you could ask yourself, do we really need to do that? And it's a valid question. The Turing test was broken by Eugene Guzman back in around 2001. Which showcased, and Guzman was an AI construct that was nowhere near a perfect emulation of a human brain, but it fooled enough people into thinking that it passed Turing. And so it showcases that we may not have to get all the way to a fully cognitive computer before we can actually use this technology as if it was a full AI. The conversational AIs that are in place, at least the cutting edge ones, are really hard to determine that they aren't human. The big IBM trial in insurance sales had Watson being asked out by some of the people that were calling in thinking it was a real woman. Granted, we males are a little mentally compromised when it comes to making decisions like this. But that aside, the fact that we can get very close to something that can emulate a human and fool other humans indicates that we may be closer to a workable solution than we realize, and we may not need to go all the way to a fully cognitive self-actualized autonomous computer to do much of what it is we want to do. It'll be fascinating to see what Tom Ross does with his AI running mate, because it brings up the question: if you were a politician running, wouldn't your AI running mate be a digital twin of yourself, so that if something happened to you, that digital twin could just step in without any sidestep or misstep and carry the policies forward? It's also held that a computer like this in a full AI politician could better represent their constituencies, because they'd be less likely to be motivated by monetary considerations and the kind of bias that typically gets in and corrupts the political process. On the other hand, I'm quite sure the very wealthy will figure out a way around those particular limitations. So we have that. But in any case, what it does, it brings us much closer to that ideal of a general purpose AI, and something that could be put in and supplement or replace a lot of people at scale.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Professor. Professor David Smith.
Cognitive computing is such a holy grail that there's so many variations of it that I'm looking anxiously forward to where we see parts of it implemented. But what's interesting is some of the areas where we're pushing the basic concept of cognitive computing, they're really being accelerated by brain-inspired computing. And some of them are things like autonomous vehicle, robotics, arm control, and dynamic vision sensing. Those are areas where you will see brain-inspired computing move towards the cognitive computing model faster than any other areas, because in autonomous driving, there's a set of rules that can follow a lot of it. But then you get into the situations where it has to make decisions in the wild. You've heard the classics. Do I hit an old person or do I hit a child? Other things like that, where you've got these thought processes going there. But one of the key things where the brain-inspired computing is headed, as well as going towards the cognitive computing model, particularly accelerated by biological chips, is in the area of this vast new world of the Internet of Things. Because as I began to do very dense sensor networks of Internets of Things, I want to process that data very parallel. I want to process it as much as real time as I can, and then make complex decisions based on it. A brain-inspired hardware approach, a brain-inspired software approach, extending what we can do with neural networks 1,000-fold is going to be necessary to be successful in working with these very broad Internet of Things sensor arrays and controlling things through the Internet of Things in real time. And that real-time model is where I was talking about, the movement towards cognitive computing is going to be so important to go there. And the beginnings of what we've seen in brain-inspired computing is still headed that way. One of the real interesting nuances of brain-inspired computing and brain-inspired hardware is if you look at the human brain uses 20 watts of power or less. And as I began to look at computing in the wild, computing in the Internet of Things, you need to be very low power. I cannot have, like in one of the recent experiments looking at it, I cannot have 96 racks of blue gene computers doing the biological inspired computing. It's not low power. It doesn't give me the things we need to do. So those are some of the drivers you begin to see there. And this whole autonomous area of driving, robotics, manipulation, vision recognition are going to push that envelope exceedingly hard. the question I often get from you, Sharif, is what do we need to do with this as we look in our colleges and universities? And biological computing, brain-inspired computing, is a software discipline. It's also a hardware discipline. It's also physics. It's actually also biology. I recommend to students today to take at least one biology course in their college career, because software processes are moving more and more biologically inspired, if not biologically enabled. Storage is moving to be biologically based. I can take a strand of RNA and store a whole lot of information on it. And now that we understand how to cheat the Heisenberg effect, we can actually begin to use strands of RNA as a storage medium now. The other thing I would do is I look at the university environment, particularly looking there is to do brain-inspired hardware, software, computing. The system dynamics becomes very important again. And where I see people excelling in that now, for example, if you look at Purdue, if you look at University of Maryland, College Park, and some of them, they're doing some really good work in this. They are approaching it from a systems of systems viewpoint. And the academic programs at universities, I think, would be well served if they want to go into brain-inspired biological computing, to look at how to put together a systems-based curriculum that pulls all these various elements together to create a program that you can understand the ecosystem and the pieces and parts so that you can make a whole that can move towards the dream of cognitive computing and biological based software and hardware. So that's kind of where I think we are.
Thank you, Professor David Smith. Mr. Tom Rose.
Yeah, I agree. It takes a transdisciplinary approach, and that's a very good advice for any college, is to combine these different disciplines to work on this thing. It was mentioned earlier. I'm going to use my time to ask these experts some questions. It was mentioned how we think in an analog way, right? And it's almost, is that a binary way? Or I've also heard that our brain is more of a quantum model, if not a holonomic model. So what's the difference between analog and quantum in just general terms when you're talking about how the brain functions? We think analog, and what does that mean? Is it a binary system? Is it a system that uses dials and chords, or are we quantum in that our brains are real? Quantum computing is more like the human brain or a biologically inspired computer, or is it? That's my question, because I've understood that quantum computing is really modeling our biological infrastructure in a way. Is that correct?
Well, so a quantum computer is about as different from a biological computer as you're likely to get. It is, when I say massively parallel, it will be an understatement when we're talking about quantum. Quantum introduces a whole set of physics-based concepts that allow you to do things that you just simply can't do on a regular computer. On the other hand, it's really good at very large mathematical problems. It is not really good at interpretation or decision making or anything along those lines. You could probably, at some point, we may be able to use a quantum computer for that, but we're nowhere near that point at the moment. The quantum computer is very focused. I mean, for instance, if you wanted to map the universe, you'd use a quantum computer, a galaxy quantum computer, weather mapping. Quantum's really good for that. But if you want to create an AI, it's the wrong tool in the toolbox. So seriously, it's quantum is about as far from what we're talking about with regard to a neural network or a computer that behaves like a human as we can probably get. And then I've got to run. I've got my 8 o'clock meeting. See you guys all next time.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Tom, let me
Thank you.
answer the
Thank
other
you.
part
Thank
of
you,
your
Professor.
question too.
Sorry.
Analog computing is where, like a thermometer, where I can be 98.1, 98.2, 98.6, where digital computing is a 0 or a 1.
Okay.
It doesn't have a 1 point ... It's
One has a
0 or 1.
spectrum, the other one has specific bits, right?
Yeah, where I have this whole range in analog. And that's the same thing in quantum. Quantum is math and pushing math, where biological computing has the nuances that you see in analog computing. So that's kind of the balancing act between them.
Yeah, you touched on it, and I think one of the spin-offs of this endeavor of biologically inspired cognitive architectures, if we could figure out how the brain manages to compute these things with such low energy, low wattage, that's a fascinating thing. It's more like we're a receiver than a generator of information. But so I think it's a fascinating approach. I always wonder, should we be emulating the human brain? Should we be emulating our specific architecture? Or should we allow for a whole new architecture that could be even better? Should we be creating something in our own image or something better? That's why I'm down.
Thank you. Yes, thank you, Mr. Tom, for your questions, and I think you get your answer. And Mr. Dan.
It's interesting that quantum computing is just at the forefront of being developed, because if you look at the history of biological evolution, the earliest sense to develop is the sense of smell. And, very primitive organisms were able to go toward smells that they liked and retreat from smells that they didn't like. And this was like a food-seeking mechanism mostly. But it's being discovered that the sense of smell actually is a quantum level effect, where there are spin residual information from electron spins. It's very, very kind of cutting edge new research, but it's out there in the in the cutting edge research world, and quantum effects are kind of spooky and weird. Einstein didn't like spooky action at a distance. It seemed to him a little too much like magic or something, but I don't know. There's just a data point. Quantum computing, sensory sense of olfaction. Maybe that shows we're developing, our first primitive neurological system. And the other thing that brains do is we have neuroplasticity, and the internet was designed actually initially by the Defense Department as a way to do nuclear war command and control. They were thinking, well, what if these chunks get destroyed? We have to have a system that can be resilient and can keep the nuclear war command going in the event certain parts are taken out. So what they invented was this store and forward protocol, where each node in the network is acting like an active part of the brain. It's neuroplastic. It's routing around damage. It's like, okay, that node doesn't work. Let's find another way to get the signal through to where it needs to go. So an interesting thing that the brain does that. Now, historically, with information in societies, you have pre-literate cultures where all the information transfer was through oral storytelling, and that had good results and bad results. I mean, at least it limited the bad effects of negative information. You might think of it as kind of a sunset clause on bad information, whereas you might get a story that's a little different or a little weirder, but at least it's not going to propagate with these harmful, codified legal bad results. So But one thing you need when you have a post-literate culture is you need a reference language. When you translate from one language to another, you can get these very strange transliterations. Like I think one story was the phrase, the spirit is willing but the flesh is weak, was run through a translator, and it came out, the meat was not very good but the vodka was great. So there is a great reference platform language, Esperanto. If you have people that are bilingual in Esperanto and their native language, you use Esperanto as the intermediate translation platform, and then you translate from that to the next target language. And this eliminates a lot of these translational problems. And it makes any other language 40% easier to learn if you learn Esperanto. So check that out. It's a synthetic language that was developed by a Polish optometrist that was very into world peace. And but for aviation, if you want to be an international aviator, English is the standard language for aviators. You have to know English if you want to fly from one airport to another. Another thing that I think is like a global nervous system is the amateur radio community, which I'm a big proponent of. There's about 3 million amateur radio operators worldwide, and they use Morse code. When they can't get spoken language through, you can get Morse code through, or it's called CW for continuous wave. And I think we need to also not neglect our handicapped partners. We need to come up with Braille cuneiform, perhaps, as a standard mode of storing and sharing information. I think it would be great if we could bring back the little Sumerian handheld clay tablets and maybe have a ring where you could poke Braille characters into the clay, and these could also be fed into ham radio stations and turned into Morse code, and we could actually have kind of a very resilient nervous system in case we have the internet go down from a solar flare or something. We would have this backup system. So I think that'd be a lot of fun to develop. And I know I was all over the map there, but there's just some global brain inspired computing ideas. And I'll pass the mic back to you, Sharif.
I would say the cuneiform tablets will probably be the only thing that survives this generation, with everything digital. Yeah. So yeah,
Okay.
let them in.
Yes. Dr. William.
Yes, cuneiform tablets. That's interesting. I'll invest in some dirt production plants. I guess just to pick up on a couple of themes here, and that's make a connection between how some of the salient points that Dave was raising, and interconnect them with some thoughts that we just heard from Dan. Part of the study, the challenge is this notion of how the brain works or how it reroutes. And so, Dave, when you raise the point that it's how the brain processes the information and the biology of base portion of it that we're still not sure of, and that it's rather as the holy grail, that conjures up the notion that we really need, we should be investing at least as a country or as a consortium, a global consortium, in something akin to the moonshot. Now, I will remind the audience that the Obama administration, we had, everybody knows, the Human Genome Project, which was a commitment to mapping the entire human gene, and then all the results that flowed from that with regard to diseases and the advancement of our knowledge. Well, the Obama administration had launched a similar program with regard to the mapping of the human brain. And that is still at a various stage. But that seems to be something that works alongside of the need and the development, the foundational aspects of where we are currently with a neuromorphic computing. Now, the way that ties in, Dan, and you'll be surprised because I want to make sure that you were not all over the place and that I was following you. And that's simply this: that when we start talking about our otherly enabled community and colleagues, the point there is that they are at the forefront as prime examples of how their brains have rewired themselves. So when you were talking about how the military complex came up with the internet as a way to reroute information, you're essentially describing the challenges that our otherly enabled colleagues had to deal with. And that was something that the brain did automatically based on its biological pathways, which, as David pointed out, is in fact the Holy Grail. So in some respects, it is exactly when David was talking about what you need in terms of our educational workforce moving forward, this kind of a transdisciplinary cross-spectrum approach where you see the similarities and look at either nature and just see where it can be supplemented with technology and or research, and research can augment what we understand about the biological nature in a comprehensive way to put it all together. Now, that having been said, it seems to me that there are certain advancements that we ought to consider as a global responsibility rather than an individual nationalistic or an individual corporate pursuit. I get that we want to compete and that we're all going to race to the finish, but there are certain things that ought to be shared across the globe, just in the interest of general advancement. And one of them was the Human Genome Project. I mean, to another degree, one of them should have been the atom bomb and all the technology there, but we were at a time of competition and Cold War. But nevertheless, ultimately, that information was disseminated across the globe. But it seems to me that our pursuit of neuromorphic computing skills, as well as the advancements on a separate level, quantum computing, should be a holy grail for a global pursuit. And that rather we should have a general sense, both with governments and corporations, that whoever gets there first, that there's this tacit understanding that we're going to share the knowledge. Because the knowledge, once achieved and once the mechanics achieved, will have a profound impact across all of our society. And no one nation and no one corporation should or can fully implement all of the benefits, which is suffice to say, Tom, not any one person can implement the potential. And so it shouldn't be limited to one corporation, one government, one segment of society. And so in that regard, policy, governments, corporations, forward-thinking people ought to be thinking of this as a global initiative. And with that, I will hand it back to you, Dr. Sharif. But you see,
Thank you. Thank you.
All right.
Thank you, Dr. William. Professor David Kelly, like we are just discussing on this question, why we need neuromorphic computing and how neuromorphic computing work. So as you are from innovative industry, so if you give some solid example for our youth communities, I'm sure they will learn and they develop some case study from our session.
Well, I mean, if you want me to comment on neuromorphic computing, I think we're a long ways from doing anything really spectacular with neuromorphic computing. I mean, there's some chips coming out that are kind of interesting, but it's not like you're going to model the human brain on a chip. We just don't have the tech to do that, and the chip would have to be ginormous to begin with. One neuromorphic processor is, there are trillions of connections inside the human brain, and there's more stars in the human brain than there are. There are more neurons in the human brain than there are stars in the Milky Way galaxy, and these chips they have now are just, they're great for certain kinds of specialized tasks, and what the cool thing about them is you can repurpose neuromorphic chips. You can optimize it for this algorithm or that algorithm with the same chip, and that's kind of interesting. But I don't think, like for our work with AGI systems, it's not really that helpful.
Thank you, Mr. Adam.
Thank you, Sharif. Oh, can you hear me okay now? Is it better?
Yes.
I turned my fan off. I think that's what it was. When Professor Rob mentioned dolphins, I was reminded instantly of John C. Lilly, one of my favorite historical figures, a very interesting guy. flotation tanks are really cool. I recommend them. And this topic reminded me of Nick Bostrom, who is an expert on transhumanism and subjects like global superconsciousness. And Dan saying that about smells is super interesting as well, as I have a friend who is very interested in olfaction and fragrance quality. Certainly is a sensory modality that is not given its due credit, unfortunately. So another question I asked myself regarding global superconsciousness, which we talked about earlier, which is could be an inevitability, yes or no, maybe. I think it will be important to make the distinction between a global superconsciousness, a holistic entity where each one of us is assimilated as a neuron into this planet-sized brain. How big is the distinction between that global superconsciousness and a multitudinous network of individual mind brains who still retain their personhood, their personality, their character, their individuality, their free will? They are humans just like us, but they have this extra capability, and maybe a few others, where they can access each other's mind brains with empathogenic technology link-ups, where consent to do so is absolutely sacrosanct. So they have these extra senses and capabilities, but no portion of their individuality or humanity has been taken away. Those two situations are quite different. Maybe some thinkers would disagree and explain that they might not be as far apart as I would first suppose, but I am convinced for now that they are. And certainly with the first scenario, a global superconsciousness where we all become assimilated into a planet-wide techno-superorganism as a neuron each, certainly is a step forward in some ways. It is an advancement, technically, but it seems like those characteristics I listed earlier, free will, personhood, individuality, character, uniqueness, have all been compromised or taken away completely. So maybe some other thinkers will find a way to have both. Maybe the first scenario will be easier than the second one. So it might take some effort to not fall into a dystopian abyss from which there is no escape. But if there's anything difficult worth doing, it's certainly not slipping into an immortal techno-hell scenario. What is more important than that? And Dan highlighted an important point about the risk of the internet being destroyed in its entirety, which would be a tragedy of greater proportions than the burning Library of Alexandria by several orders of magnitude probably, which is a credit to more obsolete generations of computing and data storage. Although it feels like obsolescence itself is exponentially increasing, and we keep updating our smartphone models every couple of months and counting. So if we are to upload our minds into a supercomputer in the Kurzweilian sense, then technology that constantly updates and improves itself and is programmed to make itself more robust and resilient to risks both big and small and existential, maybe that is where nanotech can be advantageous. Thank you, Sharif.
Thank you, Mr. Adam. This is an excellent discussion. I am sure our audience really enjoyed today's sessions. I want to go for concluding remarks. Before that, because Malaysian Climate Change Division, they promoting World Talent Economy Forum heavily in the ecosystem, not only in the Malaysian local economy, but also internationally. So they already confirm that that we will arrange 20. Like public-private partnership dialogue 25 October. It's not only dialogue, actually we are helping Malaysian government to develop a resilient Malaysia. And those who are from corporation, those who are interested to develop smart city, water purifications, even solar energies, and many even we need a lot of solution through AI. Especially Malaysia is a big manufacturing hub, and it's near about $60 billion economical plan. And already I'm sure how actually our speakers contributing through World Talent Economy Forum is highly recognized by the government body. So CASA actually supporting World Talent Economy Forum. I want to give thanks Petronas, as well as other organizations, those who supporting our initiative. And this is the World Talent Economy Forum's open dialogue. So it will be Dubai time, 2 p.m. to 4 p.m. But beside that, our regular session already now, Malaysian government and other corporation, they are promoting, and we will send invitations to our speakers. So those who regularly join World Talent Economy Forum, we will send you invitations. And beside that, we need solution, we need real life work, we need open dialogue, we need a lot of research and a lot of solutions. And I'm sure our board of advisors, our fellow, how they're contributing World Talent Economy Forum, we can bring more solutions. And we need to engage with engage with the people, engage with the developing nations. And I believe that Asia Pacific is the future of economy. The more the corporations and the intellectual community they engage with this Asia Pacific economy, they will get more solution. Beside that, Malaysian Society for Higher Education Policy and Research Developments, they are organizing dialogues 24th September, Friday, 10 a.m. to 12:30 a.m. This is very, very important for international student, and everybody know Malaysia is a very important hub for education. So Taylor's University, UT Mara, Asia Pacific University, Malaysia Qualifications Agency, all of them actually joining their board of advisor, their CEO, they are joining in this session. So I request our audience, please observe this show. This is very important for educational development in Asia Pacific, and we also supporting this initiative. Also, the EMGS CEO, like all of the higher education in the, universities governing body EMGS, their CEO also joined World Talent Economy Forum. So I believe it will be one of the best platform for public private partnerships. Like we are collaborating with government, academy, and industries. Even beside that, senators Annie from Australia, he will join next Saturday to World Talent Economy Forum. Hopefully this will be another interesting show. So thank you everyone. Thank you Professor David Kelly, Professor David Smith, Mr. Tom Rose, Dr. William, Mr. Dan and Adam for supporting you. Like you are really, really supporting a lot to World Talent Economy Forum, but we need more solution. We need more we need to work as a team, and we need to find out the way how we can contribute for the developing nations. So this is the way, like what we are creating with this public private partnership dialogue. It will not be dialogue, it's more on action. We want to develop ecosystem, and this way I'm sure that we can minimize the gap, and especially the developed nations invest on education, invest on research. Ultimately this is the way of futures, and I believe Asia Pacific has a lot of talented, lot of young energetic researchers. I request everyone you join our initiative, because we are targeting 1 million students for 3 years. It's very possible right now how we are working. So thank you everyone for your continuous support for World Talent Economy Forum. I directly want to go for the concluding remarks. I want to start from Professor David Kelly. Yes, what's your concluding remarks? Can you unmute please?
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, please. Yes.
Did
Mr.
that
David.
make sense to you? Yeah, I said I was hoping I wouldn't be first.
Okay. Okay. Professor David Smith, what's your concluding remarks?
I love your topics again, and this one is one of your more futuristic ones, because the greatest error of this is going to be in the future. And as such, there's a lot of opportunity for academic work, a lot of opportunity for governments to go in and help support this going forward. A lot of entrepreneurship activities. You know, if I look over the last 3 years, we've seen a growth of entrepreneurship based around quantum computing. And quantum computing has a lead-lag relationship with biological computing of about 10 years. So where we are today in quantum computing, that's where we're going to be in biological computing in about a decade. And now is the time for entrepreneurs to begin to start positioning where they can take advantage of it. And I think the examples that Rob and I used of saying one is really good at understanding math, one is really good about understanding complex problems with multivariants in them, is the way entrepreneurs should begin to look at this. Fortunately, many of the problems that are going to solve the complex needs of society today are not based on mathematical models. They're based on multivariant type of computation and sensing, where brain-inspired, biologically inspired computing is going to excel. And it's the perfect opportunity to begin to set the infrastructure in place in academia, the infrastructure in place in the entrepreneurship community to go and excel as this moves into its time frame. In both quantum computing and biological computing, the time from an early discovery in a lab to UC market applicability is on the extreme of our lead lag relationships. In both of these, it's about a 20-year period. So work that was being done early stage 20 years ago is what we're seeing today move into the commercial sector. So there's a lot of opportunities to set up the fundamental infrastructure to excel in brain and biological computing today that will pay back in the future. And that's why the government is a critical part of helping set that in place today, because government tends to have more patient capital than commercial companies have patient capital, and it's needed in this way to go forward. It's an excellent place to go, though. There's a lot of complex problems where the early parts of it are being used today to solve very large scale problems. And I would encourage people, particularly in your region, to begin to jump on this ship because it's going to be one of the fundamentals that's going to shape this century. I have to do my last little piece of self promotion here because I try not to do self promotion. But if you go back and look at the last issue of Business Week of the last century, I was one of the 7 futures chosen to say what this century is going to be all about. And my forecast then was this century is going to be about the age of bio. Our topic today is what I believe will be one of the cornerstones for this century. And it's very important for people to be ready to compete in this area. So Sharif, thank you so very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor David Smith. Mr. Tom Rose.
Well, yeah, good. Another masterclass for me this morning. I think, yeah, you're right. I think before long, AI, Internet of Things is going to be the new substrate. You know, it's going to be like electricity is to us today. And so there's so much opportunity in that, obviously. What I think is the real opportunity as far as people are concerned, because at some point AI, AGI, all this stuff will become commonplace and it will lose the sheen of excitement and futurism at some point. So I think what we really need to do is focus young people on the fact that they are walking around with these massive quantum computers in their skulls that have been dulled, that have been mechanized societally for a couple hundred years, you know, into the industrial age. We are not using our brains and our innate capabilities the way we should. We have Jedi powers that we are not tapping into. We have, you could say we have psychic ability, and that's not even magic. That's just the end result of the qualia of information that we've taken in and processed in some way. This isn't magic. This isn't metaphysics. This is what we're working with. This is our computer. So I think it's really important to shift the mindset for young people to understand that they are 100 years ahead of any computer right now, any artificial intelligence. And we should also talk about, I might be wrong in trying to separate an AI as a running mate. And I'm being agile, I'm being open-minded enough in the next 3 years to completely change that idea, but it's really sparking some good conversations. Because I think it might be less about separating ourselves from it as a separate entity and merging with it, you know, augmenting ourselves. And so I'm starting to learn more about the Centaur AI concept. And, you know, so a person that can really merge and use AI in a very specific way. And so the running mate may be a very advanced developer. You know, it might be some. So I'm staying open to that, but it's very important to put this forward, to have these conversations for my own case, for my own instance, to learn. I'm learning so much on these shows. And, you know, and I think that's my role. I was the kid in class who didn't mind raising the hand and asking the stupid question. It made me a bit of a teacher's pet, but it also helped the people who were afraid to raise their hand. So I was that guy who always raised the hand, asked the stupid question, and that's what I'm doing here. as an interloper in the AI world and in politics. I'm asking the stupid questions, and there's a wisdom there, because it's preparing me for some hard questions that will come at me if they do. So anyway, that's what we're doing here. This is exciting about this, and I just thank you for inviting me on to these free master classes you're giving us.
Thank you, Mr. Tomrose. You are also available for us. Already, we think that you will be our Bapu 2024, but you need to be successful. That is the young people and the young generations. They expect that we need global leaders. We need some leaders who has empathy, who love people, who can contribute for the global communities. So we really need people like you who can help each others and who can create a platform and create a better communities. So thank you, Mr. Tomrose, for your initiative. Professor David Kelly, what's your concluding remarks today? Okay, in that situations, Mr. Dan.
Okay. We had a kind of a setback in government back in 1980 when Ronald Reagan made his famous pronouncement, "Government is not the solution, government is the problem." and we are the government. I mean, we are the neurons in the body politic, and I think it was a terrible disservice to civic engagement, for that meme to be spread out. Cooperation is actually a much higher evolutionary state than competition. I mean, when you have maybe a sea of single-celled organisms and they're all trying to compete for resources, yeah, I can see maybe that's an appropriate place to have a competitive style of social organization. But to create a successful multicellular organism like our bodies are, or like our societies ought to be, you need very complex and nuanced levels of cooperation. I mean, most of the cells in our bodies are actually non-human DNA. I think that we're outnumbered 24-1 with the microbial non-human cells to the DNA-based cells. But that shows that we've learned to become these immense colonies of cooperation. So why isn't our government reflecting this? The resources of nature ought to be equally accessed by all the inhabitants of the biosphere, and done so in the most artificially or naturally intelligent way. I again want to put up a flag for Henry George and the Georgist idea, where land is administered by the community through a market-based auction system, where there's a single tax. Even Milton Friedman said this was the best possible tax. And he's the Nobel Prize-winning economist, and he said it was the least bad tax, the Henry George land value tax. So that's probably another topic. But I think that's the biological frontier is going from competition to the best of a hybrid system of collaboration and competition to make the next social leap. And I think I'm optimistic about it because we have great fora like these and great expert classes like these going on. So thanks again for the opportunity to participate.
Thank you, Mr. Dan. Professor David Kelly.
Sure. So a couple of comments first. I guess I wanted to go more later so I could get a little more handle. I feel like I didn't quite catch everything going on today. But so a couple of comments. In terms of a global super consciousness, I don't think that's going to just magically happen. I think that in a way you have this abstract sort of consciousness of a system, but it's not really going to be conscious in a hardwired sense. It'll never happen unless we alter it to do that, and we haven't at all. It's the internet is still based on TCP/IP, and there's nothing special about that other than it allows us to have these self-healing networks and all of that kind of thing, which is great, but it's not going to wake up unless we make it. the other thing is, I think we should be careful about referring to the human mind as having any kind of quantum capability. There's no like empirical evidence to support that. There's some hypothesis kind of sort of level stuff, but there's no evidence of that, and I think it's dangerous to believe that, at least from a research standpoint. The other thing about where we're going, I think over the next decade or two, one of the big traits we're going to see is that technology is going to sink into the background, whether that's specifically IoT related technologies or whatever it is. It'll be more part of the environment, in the walls, in the desk, in the furniture. It'll be part of the environment and less like all over the place, in an obvious way. It instead of having a bunch of appliances on my kitchen counter, there might be stuff in the walls or in the part of the refrigerator infrastructure and things like that. I think another thing to note is someone said that we're a long ways from biological computing or artificial biological computing, and I believe that's absolutely right. But I think when we start talking about biologically inspired tech or architectures, like whether it's research systems like ICOM or Uplift or even NARS or something, we've actually made lots and lots of progress, and those kinds of systems we're seeing start to move towards production now, commercially. I think one of the big dangers, I know that it's on one hand we want to be open source, we want to be able to provide everything to everyone from an information standpoint, but companies that invest in this stuff, if they don't have the right to monopolize it, they can't afford to do the research. And if we take a stance where we're forcing everyone to open source this stuff, the commercial sector is not going to be able to afford to invest a lot in that research. And so I think there's a balancing act we need to find to be able to support commercial investment in technology, while also maybe something like the Human Genome Project that's open to everyone. And I don't know that I know where the line is. I'm just saying that I think there's a danger that we should be cognizant of it, when we're making sure people are open about what they're doing. I think that's pretty much what I had to say right there.
Thank you, Dr. William.
Yeah, and thank you once again. I love all my colleagues in master class, non-master class. I just love seeing everybody crack jokes in the technical world. I mean, it's a skill. I think that, just in conclusion, I want to highlight just a couple of observations, but I want to begin with this basic theory that I think we can all that I think should be center and foremost. I call it, and I'm going to term it here, enlightened engagement. First, just to pick up where David left off, he's absolutely right that there is an inherent tension between moving forward in an open source, collaborative sense, but at what cost with regard to individualized incentives. Now, of course, that when you start to, I'm not sure where that balance is either, but you have on the one hand the competing interest when you're looking for that incentive for us to move collectively forward, share the information, and then how to do it. Now, Dan, on the one hand, suggests that the government ought to have this investment with regard to the moonshot. and then move away and say, not necessarily the government is the solution, but the government can be a catalyst in certain areas. And then we have the countervailing notion and contribution from David saying, what role is the private sector playing in this, and what incentives do they have to actually marshal their own privately sourced resources in to this collective goal? And that's where this kind of notion of enlightened engagement, which involves this concept of the intertwining of all of the incentives, and that each stakeholder bringing to the table that which they can marshal in a way that does not turn into a disincentive. So, for example, with Dan's notion that the government should take a lead role, and I agree that it should take a prominent role. But then the question becomes, how much control is the government going to exercise? Are they then going to just be act like a bad actor and hoard it all for themselves, thus squishing out or crowding out the private sector? By the same token, David's right. The private sector has a role in terms of being emphasizing incentive-based contribution so that they can then monetize it and seek a return. But then the same question ultimately arises, that should it be a winner take all, can they then monopolize it to the exclusion of the government across the globe and a global wide benefit? And so the complexity of it, much like the pursuit of the Holy Grail itself, which is neuromorphic or biologically based computing, or this AI or AGI, is essentially this: that it's going to impact how we think now, because we do have the luxury of time at this point, and I can't emphasize that enough. As David Smith pointed out, that there is a lag time, and so maybe 10 years ahead of us, so that we can engage in the meaningful building of relationships between government, between private companies, developing the cooperation, developing multinational or multilateral, multiplayer, if you will, consortia that as we move collectively forward in this global project. And so the issue here for both corporations and governments, and particularly developing nations, because you have the greatest resource of all. You have the human capital. And when you start to plan 10 years out, you can be developing the cross-disciplinary skills in your developing nation workforce that is going to pursue and form the foundation for the type of work that Dave talked about, the type of work that Tom was exploring, the kinds of ideas that Adam and Dan were talking about, based on how Rob and David Smith were describing the kind of skills necessary as we move towards the future. Developing nations are inherently superior with the advantage of human capital. So for those governments, whether it's Malaysia or any of the other Pan-Asian nations that are out there, this is the blueprint. Now thinking of foreign relationships, cross-national relationships and consortiums. So the future is bright. I'm optimistic. Planning resources in terms of both material and human capital now, so that because we understand where we're going to go. It's not going to change a great deal. Right now, it's about marshaling all of our collective strengths wherever we may lay and directing it towards the future, because 10 years is going to go by like that. I will hopefully still have my hair. It will still be silver, but 10 years from now, Malaysia will be at the forefront, because they will have an entire population of the students that Dr. Sharif is targeting right now will then be the future leaders and commentators. And Tom, indeed, will have a whole cadre of candidates to run for office. So with that, I do appreciate it. It's always a pleasure. And I, of course, remain humble and thankful for being included. Dr. Sharif.
Thank you, Dr. William, for your comments, and hopefully we can work as a team. And yes, we need more support from developed world. Mr. Adam, you are also working as a fellow for World Talent Economy Forum. So, what's your experience, and what you want to add as a concluding remarks?
Thank you, Sharif. I was on holiday last week, hence my absence last week. So it's good to see you all again. Sorry for being a bit late as well. My laptop froze. I had too many tabs open. So it's always a pleasure to be here. I second what Mr. Tom Ross said about untapped abilities, and there's a budding psychonaut without incriminating himself too much, just a little bit. It was a relief to hear someone espouse this way of thinking. And I also wanted to second what Professor David Smith said. This was a delightfully futuristic, far futuristic subject, and as a budding futurist as well, it was a good imagination stimulator, and I have lots of fun doing this kind of Kurzweilian forecasting. It's great. So I look forward to mind melding with you all and having telepathy with you all one day. And I also wanted to acknowledge what Mr. David Kelly said about the waking up of a global superconsciousness, not happening spontaneously. Not happening spontaneously unless we guide it. Perhaps the idea of a global superconsciousness is rather hyperbolic and dramatic, and maybe a bit alarmist too in that sense, and might not necessarily be a realistic cautionary idea or existential risk like an asteroid, which is more likely. And yeah, I'm also very excited about the direction we're all heading in, and it's a real pleasure to be with you all and to have colleagues such as yourselves. And yeah, I'm very excited, and just thank you for having me along for the ride.
Thank you. Dear audience, Malaysia Society for Higher Education Policy and Research Development, they are arranging this this dialogue. Professor Dr. Hadi Nur Aziza Ali's, she is the Director of Academic Development, UT Mara. Dato Premjit Singh, he's CEO from Asia Pacific University. Dr. Haji Azman Shah bin Abdullah, he was deputy CEO of Malaysian Qualification Agency. So all of them actually joining in this discussion. So World Talent Economy Forum actually supporting their initiative, because we need to create a better education system and education policy. And many scholars from Malaysia and Asia Pacific, different university like vice chancellor, rectors, and deputy rector, they will join soon in World Talent Economy Forum. So thank you for all of your support. We are developing a knowledge-based platform, but hopefully we can find out solutions, and those who have good solution, they can communicate with World Talent Economy Forum, because as we developing a better economical strategy, we need many solutions. We need solution for sustainability, climate change, smart city, water purifications, energies, and many more things. And Malaysian government, and they are open for that, and World Talent Economy Forum actually arranging all of the blueprint. So hopefully your contribution will change the nation. So now we are in like we are developing nations. We are not in personal interest. This way maybe we can contribute more for developing nations. Thank you, Mr. Dan, Dr. William, Mr. Tom, Mr. Adam, and Professor David Kelly for your continuous support for World Talent Economy Forum. Bye bye and take care. Bye.
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 Bye.